Hello, I'm Captain Jeff. I'm host of the Airline Pilot Guy podcast. And what you're watching here, if you haven't seen this before, is a live recording of my audio podcast. And this is what I primarily do, although I've started doing video. I've done it a little bit, here and there in the past, but I'm trying to do it consistently now to try to reach an audience that's only available on YouTube. So I'm recording an audio podcast here, which is available for download on iTunes or your favorite audio podcast directory. Or you can go to my website, airlinepilotguy.com, and press the play button and listen to it there if you'd rather. But since you're already here watching the YouTube video, might as well just grab yourself a beer or a Coke and watch me podcast live in my hotel room. This is my studio. Okay, without further ado, let's get started. Airline Pilot Guy, episode number 69.
Flight 209, are you clear for takeoff?
Roger.
LA, good morning. 123.9.
Roger. Request connected. Over.
Flight 209.
Hello, you're listening to the Airline Pilot Guy Show, the view from my side of the cockpit door. I'm Captain Jeff, your host, broadcasting live from Studio 206 at the Doubletree Hotel in beautiful sunny Tampa, Florida. In this episode, a Lion Air crash in Bali update, another captain locked out of the cockpit, more electronic device nonsense, your feedback, and much more. So, get all settled in. Tray tables and seat backs in their upright and locked positions. Electronic devices powered on. Flight 69 is ready for pushback. Hello again and welcome back to the Airline Pilot Guy. I hope you had a great week. I had a great weekend. I know that I did. I may have mentioned it on the last show that last weekend the family were driving to Charlotte, or just outside of Charlotte, Belmont to be exact, North Carolina, for my daughter Alyssa's graduation from college. And so she's now a happy holder of a bachelor's in elementary education. And she has her teaching certificate. Now, all we need is some great Catholic school to hire her. So she's looking for a job right now. But anyway, we had a great time. The weather held out for us on Saturday before it started raining in the afternoon. And had a great weekend with the family and back out again on more trips. So it is now Thursday. Let's see, what day is today? The 16th of May, I think. And we are doing Airline Pilot Guy episode number 69. Lots to talk about. So let's start off by playing the sound clip. Okay, as I mentioned, I'm not sure if this is what I mentioned in the intro or not, but I'd like to start off with let's do that. I did mention this. Arvin sent me some feedback. He is a new listener, and let me just start off with his feedback, but it's going to lead to a news item. So he says, "Hi, Captain Jeff. I've been following your podcast for the past couple of months now. I have to say it is a pity I didn't follow it much earlier. I'm an Indonesian currently working in Singapore as a civil engineer, but aviation has always a place in my heart. It seems aviation really taking place here in this part of the world, in Indonesia, where the growth in the industry is just absurd and the number of people interested in aviation just expand astronomically. We have our own aviation enthusiast community in Indonesia called Indo Flyer, with members coming from airline pilot groups, ground staffs, and just fellow aviation geeks. Some airlines like Garuda Indonesia and AirAsia, Indonesia's operation, have been growing really fast while keeping their safety records clean. However, there are a few that still are lacking in the safety area. Our airlines are still technically banned from entering the European Union, except Garuda, Indonesia, AirAsia, Mandela, and Airfast, and we are still in FAA Category 2. One incident that you have mentioned in your podcast was the Lion Air crash in Bali. The preliminary report from Indonesia, NTSC, which is similar to the NTSB in the United States, found that the pilots descended below the minimum descent altitude without acquiring the runway, the side of the runway, and started a go-around procedure just around 20 feet AGL. And then he has a link here for that, and we're going to talk about that in a second. Thanks for your time creating this great aviation podcast. You're welcome, Arvin. Regards, Arvin Tunas. EITL lead AP. Okay, so thank you, Arvin, for sending me the feedback, and let me go here to the actual preliminary report from the NTSC in Indonesia. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble reading this whole thing because it's not coming into complete view for me. Here we go. Okay, now it is. Indonesia's NTSC, yes, released their preliminary report confirming the aircraft was PK-LKS MSN 38728, which had been formally registered with Malindo Air under registration 9M-LNB and had first flown on February 5th, 2013, and had been delivered on February 19th, 2013. Okay, well, we've already talked about some of these details. The captain had 15,000 hours total. He was 48 years old. I'm acting like he is not here with us. I think he's still fine. He's still alive. The captain is 48 years old. Airline transport pilot license holder. 15,000 hours total. 7,000 hours on type. He was the pilot monitoring. The first officer, 24 years old. Commercial pilot's license. 1,200 hours total. 923 hours on type. Was the pilot flying. So you can see there, do the math. Looks like he had less than 300 hours of total time before I guess he started flying the 737. So pretty new, inexperienced co-pilot, I would say. Although some people would say 1,200 hours, that's an experienced pilot. But in the airline transport world, not so much. Anyway, the aircraft was positioned for the VOR DME approach to runway 9. It has a minimum descent altitude, MDA, of 465 feet AGL. And while descending through 1,600 feet, the aircraft was cleared to land on runway 9 by Tower, who reported winds from 120 degrees at 5 knots. Okay, according to the flight data and cockpit voice recorders, the aircraft was descending through 900 feet AGL when the first officer stated the runway was not in sight. 37 seconds later, the aircraft descended through 550 feet above ground level. The Enhanced Ground Proximity Warning System, the EGPWS, called minimums, the autopilot and autothrottle were disconnected, and the descent was continued. Okay, right there. The only reason you should continue descent below minimums is if you have the runway in sight. So, but they continued at 500 feet above ground level. At about 150 feet AGL, the captain took over control of the aircraft. The first officer acknowledged and stated he could not see the runway. Okay, so 150 feet above ground level. 8 seconds later, the Enhanced Ground Proximity Warning System called out 20 the captain commanded, "Go around." 1 second later, the aircraft contacted the water surface. The flight data recorder, okay, so it goes on. So apparently what happened here is visibility was changing because of some individual cells going, proceeding across the approach end of the runway. The the runway was not in sight. I'm assuming by either captain nor first officer. And the captain took control of the aircraft while it was below the minimum descent altitude. He took over at 150 feet, and I guess, again, as I said, I don't think either could see the runway, but for some reason they're still descending. At 20 feet above the water in this case, he finally commanded, "Go around," but I thought he had control of the aircraft. Anyway, probably started to initiate the go-around sequence, but of course, only 20 feet above the ground, unless you do a very deliberate, positive action, the airplane is going to continue down and contact whatever is below you. And that's what happened. So I'm not sure if this was a discipline issue or perhaps one of those issues where it's always worked out in the past, and why wouldn't it work out this time? I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly what phenomena occurred here that allowed both crew members to allow the airplane to continue descent on a non-precision approach, so no precision glide path, without seeing the runway. And, of course, they finally decided to go around when it was way too late. So that is the preliminary report from the NTSC in Indonesia. And when we hear the final, we'll report that. So thank you, Arvin, again for listening and sending in feedback. And look forward to hearing from you in the future. Now, Ted also sent me some feedback. He said, "Thought you would be interested in this article on an iPhone interfering with aircraft instrumentation." So let me go over here to my browser and look at this article. Now, okay, let me start here. This is from Bloomberg. Turning off iPhone, critical to pilots citing interference. The regional airliner was climbing past 9,000 feet when its compasses went haywire, leading pilots several miles off course, until a flight attendant persuaded a passenger in row 9 to switch off an Apple iPhone. Okay. You may remember this story because I told you this story sometime last year in an earlier episode of Airline Pilot Guy. By the way, Ted wasn't the only one that sent this in. Many of you did, John Clem, among others. And I thought, well, this looks really suspiciously familiar to me. And I thought, yeah, I've talked about this on an earlier episode. And why all of a sudden did Mr. Alan Levin from Bloomberg decide that this would be a good time to write an article on it? I don't know. Something weird going on, in my opinion. Why all of a sudden this is somehow news? And of course, all the tech blogs and tech news outlets picked up on it because it had something to do with technology, right? The iPhone, a smartphone, electronic device. And so let's go over to the report, the aviation. Let's see, what's the actual name for this thing? The Aviation Safety Reporting System report. And this was reported in May of 2011. So this incident occurred actually before that. And let me see if I can determine exactly when it happened. Looks like it says date 2011-05. Yeah, I guess May of 2011. Okay. And here is the report, NASA ASRS report 950259. May of 2011. Narrative. After departing, climbing through 9,000 feet, we received an EFIS, Electronic Flight Information System, comp mon caution message. So that's a comparator that looks at the various instruments between the pilot and co-pilot. And mon means monitor. So there's a system that looks at all these different things, and if there's something that's different between the left operating position, the captain's position, and the first officer's position, you get this caution message that alerts you to the fact that, hey, what you guys are looking at are different. The flight manual directs the pilots to slew compass to reliable side. It was apparent neither side was correct with the captain's magnetic compass and first officer headings were all different. We were cleared direct to a fix. Multiple attempts were made to match the headings with only temporary results. Okay, let me stop. At this point, anytime you have a navigational problem, you let air traffic control know. You say, hey, we're having trouble with our headings. They're not matching up. Can you give us a heading, or how does our heading look? We're not able to navigate normally. But they didn't do that. So multiple attempts were made to match the headings with only temporary results. The captain elected to hand fly while the headings mismatched. While the FMS was taking us in a direct line, with the wind shift, while hand flying, the aircraft ended up 4 miles south of the original direct to fix course. Okay, now why the captain decided to go ahead and hand fly the airplane and not let the flight management system fly the direct line, regardless of whatever your compass headings were indicating, I don't know. I don't think they would have gotten off course. Let's see. While the FMS was taking us in a direct line with the wind shift while hand flying, the aircraft ended up 4 miles south of the original course. ATC called and asked if we were going direct. I told them we were having heading problems and asked how our heading looked. He told us 10 degrees right and direct when able. On this trip, we flew the same aircraft for 9 legs and did not have this problem on any other flight. In the past, I've had similar events with speculation that cell phones left on may contribute to the heading problems. I made a PA asking our passengers to check their cell phones and make sure that they are off. Short of flying with both headings in DG, we attempted to slew the compasses together again, and the EFIS Comp Mon was cleared, the message was cleared, with no further messages. Our flight attendant called and asked if that had helped. I said, yes. What did you do? He stated he walked through the cabin and spoke to each of the 12 passengers. A passenger in row 9 had an iPhone in the standby mode, not airplane mode or off. He showed the passenger how to turn the phone off fully. The flight continued to destination with no further problems. Now, this is the first officer's narrative. In my opinion and past experience, the cell phone being on and trying to reconnect to towers on the ground, along with the location of row 9 to the instrumentation in the wing, caused our heading to wander. The timing of the cell phone being turned off coincided with the moment where our heading problem was solved. 8 other flights in the same aircraft in 2 days span completed without a similar event. Okay, so that's the original report in NASA's Aviation Safety Reporting System, the ASRS. Now, perhaps we should take a step or two back. What is this system you are talking about? Well, you may have heard me talk about a system that a lot of airlines employ, including Acme, which is called ASAP, which is the Aviation Safety Action Program, which is very similar to the NASA ASRS program, which has been around for quite some time. I think the 70s is when the ASRS was first initiated. Yeah, back in August of 1975. And this system was in place so that the industry, the safety industry most particularly, could gather data on incidents and such without indicting or prosecuting the pilot, or could be flight attendant, could be controller, whatever. And so the way it was set up was that if you were in a situation, let's say you busted an altitude or you got off course, as in this instance, navigationally wise, you could file a NASA report within a certain time frame, I think within 24 hours, and you would be immune to prosecution as far as any certificate action. So they couldn't pull your certificate. And so it was kind of like a get out of jail free card. Now, they did put some stipulations here because if you're doing something in a negligent way, or you were purposely doing something wrong, this system would not protect you. Let me read from the ASRS website here. Oh, by the way, and you may also wonder why this is not something that the FAA administers. Well, they decided that to make sure that it was completely independent from the FAA as far as enforcement action was concerned, they decided that the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, would be the federal agency that would administer this program, so that you keep the FAA out of it and enforcement action would be prevented. So, although a finding of a violation may be made, neither a civil penalty nor a certificate suspension will be imposed if, number one, the violation was inadvertent and not deliberate. The violation did not involve a criminal offense, accident, or action under 49 U.S.C. 44709, which discloses a lack of qualification or competency, which is wholly excluded from this policy. Number three, the person has not been found in any prior FAA enforcement action to have committed a violation of 49 U.S.C. Subtitle 7 or any regulation promulgated there for a period of 5 years prior to the date of occurrence. And 4, the person proves that within 10 days after the violation or date when the person became aware or should have been aware of the violation, he or she completed and delivered a mailed or written report of the accident or incident or occurrence to NASA. Okay, so if the violation was inadvertent and it was not a criminal offense and it was not an accident, like an aircraft accident, and as long as you hadn't employed the action of this ASRS report, or what we just usually call it a NASA report, within the last 5 years, then you were protected. Okay. Now, we have many airlines now have a system. I mentioned it just a few minutes ago. The Aviation Safety Action Program, and we call it ASAP. The goal of the Aviation Safety Action Program, ASAP, is to enhance aviation safety through the prevention of accidents and incidents. Its focus is to encourage voluntary reporting of safety issues and events that come to the attention of employees of certain certificate holders. To encourage an employee to voluntarily report safety issues, even though they may involve an alleged violation of the federal regulations, the FARs. Enforcement-related incentives have been designed into the program. An ASAP is based on a safety partnership that will include the FAA and the certificate holder, and may include any third party, such as the employee's labor organization. So, ACME does participate in the ASAP program. So, ACME, the certificate holder, is involved. The FAA is involved directly, and a third party, and in this case, the pilots union representing ACME pilots, are also a party to this program. And what happens when you submit an ASAP report, they get together, I think a couple times a month, and look at all the reports that were submitted. They look at the circumstances and decide whether certificate action is necessary or some kind of enforcement action is necessary. And then they decide whether or not additional training is required or whatever, maybe just a reprimand or a letter or whatever, but they can't pull your pilot certificate. You keep your pilot certificate. So it kind of protects you in many ways. Some airlines have had the program and then got rid of it because the FAA or the company went a little bit further than they were supposed to and didn't protect the folks that had submitted the reports. As I said, Acme is a participant in it. So ASAP, the ASAP program is kind of what we use now when we do something inadvertently wrong to try to protect our certificates. Because our certificate means that, our license is what we have to operate our job, our flights, and get paid. So it's very important that we do whatever we can to protect ourselves if we do something wrong. So going back to the NASA thing, perhaps this regional jet, this first officer for the airline, perhaps they did have an ASAP program, and he both filed an ASAP report and filed a NASA ASRS report. I'm not sure. It doesn't really state here what the deal is, but perhaps this is the only way that he could find to protect his license from certificate action. Okay, so we have this system, and you fill out the form, and it has a narrative, and then you kind of explain what is going on. Okay, so let's say we go out there and we really screwed something up, but we need to kind of blame it on something. I'm not saying that this is what happened here, but I highly suspect, you know my feeling about electronic devices, I highly suspect that this person decided that, electronic devices, especially back in 2011, they're not good, they cause interference, and hey, we were off course, so let's say, there was somebody with an electronic device on, and that's what caused our problem. Okay, so, that's human nature. We want to protect our licenses, our living, and if we have to blame it on something, hey, electronic devices, that's a great scapegoat. And that's my opinion. I know many of you listening probably disagree and think that this probably really did happen this way. And yes, that pesky Apple iPhone is what caused that thing to go 4 miles off course. I disagree, but that's my commentary and opinion about this incident. And again, why all of a sudden did they dig this thing up again? We've already talked about it in a previous episode. I don't know. Something fishy going on, in my opinion. That's all I can say about that. Okay, and again, thank you for everybody for pointing that recent article or that news event out to me. Okay, let's talk about this. I saw this in the Aviation Herald. That's avherald.com, a great website. A Kelowna 727 at Regina in Canada on May 13th, just a few days ago. Laser beam incapacitates first officer. A Kelowna flight craft Boeing 727-200, great airplane by the way, performing freight flight KFA 290 from Regina to Winnipeg with 3 crew, was climbing through 1,200 feet out of Regina when the aircraft was, and yes, that is the way you pronounce this, the name of the city, was 1,200 feet out of Regina when the aircraft was hit by a green laser beam from the ground. The first officer was temporarily incapacitated with severe pain to both eyes. The second officer was also affected, though to a lesser degree. The crew decided to continue the flight to Winnipeg, where both injured were taken to a hospital. The Canadian TSB reported that the crew immediately informed ATC. Regina Police was advised. After landing, both injured pilots were taken to a hospital, received treatment, and were released with minor injuries but have been removed from further duty. So, another incident of laser beams blinding pilots. It's just going to be a matter of time before some idiot is going to aim a beam at an airplane, perhaps not realizing the effect that it has on our vision, and that airplane's going to crash. Just a matter of time, in my opinion. So, luckily here the captain was okay and operated the flight safely, and they got it on the ground. Okay, let's go with another incident. This one Air India, they're in the news again. Remember, we talked about last episode the Air India pilots, and I haven't heard an update on this yet, so I'm not sure exactly what happened in that incident where the supposedly both pilots left the cockpit and left two flight attendants in charge, and then one of them bumped off the autopilot, and both pilots went back up to the cockpit, regained control of the airplane, and saved everybody's lives. They're heroes, right? Okay, well, this one is another Airbus, Air India Airbus 320 this time, performing Flight 403 from Delhi to Bangalore with 125 passengers. Was en route near Bhopal, India, when the captain decided to take a toilet break. The first officer and a trainee pilot remained in the cockpit. When the captain wanted to return to the cockpit door refused to open and could not be convinced to give up by captain trainee, and even refused to obey when the first officer tried his luck. The first officer decided to divert the aircraft to Bhopal, where the aircraft landed safely. Maintenance finally managed to open and repair the door that had been jammed shut. After successful intervention, the aircraft continued the journey to Bangalore, with the captain back in his seat, and reached Bangalore with a delay of 3 hours. Air India confirmed the incident, reporting that all efforts from inside and outside the cockpit were in vain. The door remained jammed shut. The first officer diverted the aircraft to Bhopal in accordance with operating procedures. A team of maintenance engineers rectified the fault, so the aircraft was able to continue the flight. Okay, so this is just one in a string of incidents where captains have left or somebody has left the cockpit, and the cockpit door has jammed closed, and they had to divert. Excuse me, my throat is acting up again. Sorry. So, let's see. I think somebody had sent me some feedback regarding that. I think it was Jeff, First Officer Jeff, my international co-pilot expert. He sent me some feedback about this. Let me see if I can find it. Yep, Captain Locked Out. He writes, "This actually happened to me on my very last flight on a Super 80. When the flight attendant closed the door after the captain left the jump seat, the jump seat lap belt somehow... I'm sorry, the captain didn't leave the jump seat. After the captain left, the jump seat lap belt somehow jammed the door. It took several minutes with the two of them pushing and pulling on the door, but it finally came open. Of course, this all happens as we're starting down over Pennsylvania into LaGuardia." First Officer Jeff. So thanks for that feedback, Jeff. And I'm sure that many of you out there have stories like this. I have not experienced an incident where either I've been locked out or my co-pilot my first officer has been locked out. But and all my years of flying, both in the military and for Acme Airlines for more than 24 years now, I've not ever had an incident with somebody locking themselves out of the cockpit. But when you have thousands and thousands of flights every day, I guess it's inevitable, isn't it? So, interesting. Let me get back to my news notebook and see if there's anything else here I wanted to talk about. I'm sure there is. Let's see. A TAM Airbus 320 en route from Recife, that's Recife, to Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, was en route when a passenger, a well-known Brazilian singer, was invited to take the captain's seat and posed in the seat to fly the aircraft that was on autopilot at the time, with the first officer in his seat. The captain took a seat again, and the aircraft continued for a safe landing in Rio de Janeiro. So far so good, right? I guess this guy is quite a celebrity in Brazil. And the captain thinks, "Hey, this is cool. Come on up, sit in my seat. Let's get some pictures." Only one problem that the crew didn't think about was the fact that this Brazilian singer posted these photos on social media. Let's see, which website that did he put on there? I don't see it now, but it's 4 photos showing the singer in the captain's seat were published, on his own website the following day, but later removed. Brazilian society media had already picked up on the story on April 29th, quoting the singer to now being experienced as a first officer. The airline initially claimed those photos were taken on the ground, but admitted after analysis of the photos that the aircraft was in flight, evidenced by engine instruments showing the engines operating and the gear lever in the up position, as well as the primary flight and navigation displays showing the aircraft in cruise flight. Both pilots were fired as a result of the occurrence. And Brazil's ANAC have opened an investigation into the occurrence. And so in this article on the Aviation Herald, there are 4 pictures of this Brazilian singer at the controls in the captain's seat in the cockpit of the Airbus 320. So I guess it seemed like a great idea at the time to the captain and first officer, but they're probably having second thoughts right now, I would think. Oh, this is interesting. Scott McCartney from the Wall Street Journal, May 15th, from Montreal. This story goes, pilots and air traffic controllers texting each other? OMG, your airline flight is finally starting to communicate the way the rest of the world does. Controllers and pilots aren't using their cell phones to text, even though many passengers now do using apps and in-flight Wi-Fi. Instead, planes with modern cockpit systems can log on to new systems at air traffic control centers and link digitally. Rather than sometimes difficult radio calls, pilots and controllers simply send each other text messages to change altitudes, routes, and hand off from one controller to the next. The system has been in use for flights across oceans for several years. Canada now has it active across its domestic skies, and European controllers have it in use in 2 large regions. But the U.S. is way behind. And I say, that's good. And let me explain why I think that there is a place for this kind of thing, and why I think that it being commonplace throughout the domestic system is very short-sighted and foolhardy. And the reason is that while digital data communications, text messages, are a great way to make sure that the clearance is fully understood, mistakes still can be made with text messages. An interesting part of this article was quoting a veteran controller, Ms. Haru, 51 years old. She said, with a couple of quick mouse clicks, she transmitted a message back, climb and maintain flight level 360. Oh, wait a minute, that was not where I was wanting to read. Oh, here we go. It's rather easy, Ms. Hero said. It's a great benefit for the traveler. I don't know why. And a great benefit for the controller. This is the biggest step forward because human error is taken away. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever sent a text message that didn't really come out the way you intended? Whether it was spell check, correcting something that you had in there and then completely misstated what you were trying to state or misconstrued your message, or perhaps it was a mistake that you made. And after you looked at the message, you went, oops, I didn't really mean to say that. Well, apparently this system in use in aviation doesn't have that propensity for human error. Okay, I'm being sarcastic. Of course, the human error is not taken away. That's ridiculous. But the main reason I am concerned about the shift from voice communication to data communication is that many of us, not all of us, but many of us out there are listening to all the other radio communications that are going on the frequency. And we are building in our minds this mental, spatial model of what is happening. We can hear people at different altitudes. We can hear people talking about experiencing turbulence. We can hear people talking about various things going on. when you take away voice communications and you only have peer-to-peer or just the airplane to the controller communication, you have basically eliminated everybody else out of the picture. And so now you are relying completely, 100% of your communication and information, you're relying upon that controller. And I can tell you, in my experience of more than 30 years of flying, there have been many times when a controller has not warned us about a hazard. I remember flying through the middle of Mississippi one fine day back in, I don't know, mid-90s, 727, and we were just flying along. It's nice and smooth. The seatbelt light is off. The flight attendants are in the midst of their beverage service. And all of a sudden, we hit this wall of, I'm not going to say severe turbulence, but it was definitely moderate turbulence. And moderate turbulence is not a lot of fun and can cause serious injury. And in fact, when we hit that turbulence, the first thing we did was throw that seatbelt light on and call the flight attendants to make sure that we didn't have any injuries. I mean, it was really bad. And after we were sure that there were no injuries on board the aircraft and everybody was in their seats, we called the air traffic controller and said, hey, we have a PIREP, a pilot report. And we just experienced some really, really heavy, moderate, bordering on severe turbulence. The air traffic controller's response was, oh, yeah, it's been like that for the last couple of hours. Now, that just made me fume. I'm thinking, well, why didn't you tell us? When we checked in on the frequency, why didn't you say, hey, Acme flight so-and-so, in about 5 minutes, you're going to hit some pretty strong turbulence. You better make sure that everybody's in their seats with their seatbelts fastened, including your flight attendants. Why didn't you warn us? There was, I don't remember what the answer was, but it wasn't a good answer. I said, you need to tell people checking in right away that there is a hazard in front of them and they need to take positive action. Okay, so that's just one incident or instance where lack of communication was evident between controller and flight. And I just see that this is just going to be a problem. The other place where I think that voice communications are essential is in the terminal area. When you have a very high concentration of airplanes and they're in the traffic pattern, and again, many of us, I'd like to think most of us out there, professional pilots, are listening to all the other flights, all their communications. They're building this mental picture again of where everybody is. Okay, this, Acme Flight 403 is over here. They're on a downwind at about 20 miles. There's somebody in front of me on a right base. There's somebody on the other runway. You're building this picture of everybody around you, so you're aware of what's happening. Okay, again, you take away the voice communications, you're relying completely on text messages for clearances, for approaches, for different altitudes. You've taken away everybody else out of the picture. Now, yes, we do have TCAS displays that can sort of help us determine where people are in the traffic pattern. ADS-B is going to be the system that's going to be replacing the TCAS system eventually. Yes, there are ways to build a picture of what's going on around you, but I don't think it's enough. I really am concerned about this idea that text communication exclusively is the answer to enhanced safety. I think it's going the wrong direction. Now, if you want to use it as in addition to voice communications, then I'm all for it. That's a great idea. I love that. Or using it across the oceans when you don't have voice communication capability. Text messages, perfect for that. Okay, a lot fewer airplanes out there, a lot of space around you. It's not like being in a terminal environment where you have airplanes very close to each other, landing and taking off. Again, the airport environment, you're on the ground, you hear everybody else and their clearances to cross runways and everything else. That is so important as far as safety is concerned. I can't tell you how many times people have heard somebody cleared across a runway and then received a clearance to take off on that same runway, and they go, wait a minute, are you sure you want us to take off? Oh, no, disregard. Hold your position. It's a safety valve that will be eliminated if we eliminate voice communications. And I feel very strongly about that, and you can probably tell. So this idea that just because this is the new way to communicate with our cell phones and such doesn't necessarily equate to greater safety and efficiency in aviation operations. Okay, now there are a few other things I wanted to talk about. I have over here on my browser. Just quickly, I ran across this while doing some research for the show. And David Learmount from Flight Global, great website, and this guy has a great blog, great reporter, and his blog is Operationally Speaking. He writes yesterday, single pilot jumbo jets just around the corner. He writes, it's official. The industry is working toward an airline flight deck that can be safely operated by a single pilot. And if it's extended long haul, an augmented crew would be 2 pilots, one on the flight deck and the other resting. A team led by, is it THALES, Thales Avionics, or TALS? Consisting of many other high-profile European companies, plus Boeing and Jeppesen from the USA, is working toward an advanced airliner cockpit that can be managed by a single pilot, backed up by a high-quality communication link with ground support. In other words, your co-pilot, if you need one, is on the ground. You still doubt this? The research is being funded by the European Union. We all knew it would be coming eventually, but maybe not quite this fast. He says more detail on Flight Global shortly. So I don't have any sources here from his blog. That was just a quick post that he made, and he said he's going to elaborate when he has more details. And speaking of that, I've talked about this in the past on previous episodes of the Airline Pilot Guy Show. The project called Astrea, ASTREAE. Did I pronounce? No, I'm sorry. ASTRAEA. It's a research group funded by the British government and commercial companies, in cooperation with the National Air Traffic Services, have outfitted a BAE Jetstream 31 for remote operation. So 2 pilots sat in the cockpit. This is from the AvWeb. By the way, I highly recommend you subscribe to this. It's free, and they deliver this to your email inbox every few days. AvWeb is the world's premier independent aviation news resource, according to them, and this is called the AvWeb Flash. And let me scroll back down to this article. 2 pilots sat in the cockpit of a 16-seat Jetstream 31 and did nothing, which is not really quite true, as it flew for 500 miles from England to Scotland in civil airspace, controlled by an operator on the ground, according to news reports this week. The flight reportedly took place sometime last month. The onboard pilots handled the takeoff and landing, according to the BBC. The test was done by Astrea, a research group funded by the government. Oh, I already talked about that. In an online video, Astrea, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing that right. I think I've really struggled with the pronunciation of this word. Astrea. It sounds like I'm saying Australia with a weird accent. Australia. Official Lambert Dopping Heppenstall says the company has been working with authorities to develop a process for certifying and operating an unmanned jet stream in the civil airspace. A representative of BAE Systems, had to cough. One of the companies involved in the project said the flights were part of a series of tests helping flight regulators and NATS to understand how these flights work and what they need to do to put a regulatory framework in place for manned and unmanned aircraft to share the airspace, according to the BBC. Quote, "It's still very early days in terms of that regulation taking place," the official said. Dopping Heppenstall said he expects to see unmanned aircraft used in a variety of applications by the end of this decade. In 20 or 30 years' time, we won't refer to unmanned aircraft. They will just be aircraft, he said. You know, these pesky pilots, we, the industry, and the government have to figure out a way to get rid of these very irritating, highly paid, highly skilled pilots flying these airplanes. We've got to figure out a way to do it. And trust me, they're working hard to do this. They really are. And you may be sitting here thinking, I think that's a good idea. Yeah, they're way overpaid, and all they do is sit there and push a few buttons. I really wish that I could take you along with me and see how the automated airplane that I fly, how much we really do. And don't kid yourself. Don't think that these airplanes that they want to fly up there with no pilot, that they're going to be safe. They're not going to be. And time will prove that. I guarantee that. And it's just not me saying that. And it's not just me protecting. I'm not the what have I said before? The buggy whip company. They're fighting to keep the automobile, the horseless carriage, from being successful because we're going to be put out of business. No, I'm not protecting. This is not going to happen within the time frame of my career. Okay. This is going to happen, and they're going to push for this sometime after I retire. Okay, so I'm not protecting my own job. I'm protecting the public safety by stating that this is just not a good idea. It's just not safe. I know. I'm just an old geezer. What do I know? Okay, here's something else I saw on the AvWeb Flash. The ATP rule change affects career choices. Remember that the legislation that calls for airline transport pilot ratings for all 121 carrier operations and 1,500 hours of experience. That's kicking in unless they do something before then in August of this year. And let me read you this. A new law that requires first officers and regional jets to hold at least an ATP certificate is not yet official, but it's already affecting aviation careers. Kent Lovelace, chair of the aviation department at the University of North Dakota, which is a school that has a very good aviation program, told AvWeb this week the law will take effect this August, whether or not the FAA has completed its proposed rulemaking process, Lovelace says. The regionals already have started to reject applicants who aren't likely to log the minimum 1,500 hours total time by this summer. And the change also has caused some students to choose a different career track. The regional's applicant pool has shrunk to where some carriers, the usable applications they have on file are virtually nil. Lovelace said in one recent survey of aviation students, with more than 1,600 respondents, about 8% said that they had abandoned plans to fly for the airlines because of the rule change. 32% were rethinking their career choice. These changes will likely contribute to a projected shortage of up to 35,000 pilots over the next 20 years or so, starting 2 or 3 years from now. The full text of the analysis and forecast of the pilot supply, to which Lovelace was a contributor, is posted online. And I'll have a link to that, if I remember, in the show notes. Excuse me for all the noise there. I have a Hall's lozenge to try to keep my vocal cords operating. This allergy thing just keeps nailing me. When I went to Charlotte last weekend, apparently the pollen is still in abundance in that area, and I got hit again, and again it started going the back of my throat and into my throat, and now I think it's made its way down into the chest. which is usually a good sign. That usually means that I'm in the last stages of this irritant. Okay. There was one more thing that I was going to talk about in this latest AvWeb flash. And let's see, where is it? Well, I don't see it. Oh, here it is. Yes. I skipped right over it. A Flyers Rights and Advocacy Group for airline passengers said on Tuesday the FAA should restrict 787 flights to within 2 hours of an airport until the safety of its lithium-ion batteries is proven. The restriction wouldn't affect flights over the continental U.S. or most flights to Europe, but trans-Pacific and trans-polar routes would be off-limits. Our proposed actions are both urgent and necessary, said Paul Hudson, president of the organization. Adequate testing of the batteries haven't been done, and the fire investigation is not finished. United Airlines is the only U.S. carrier flying 787s. They plan to resume domestic flights with the airplane next Monday, and will start flying the Denver-Tokyo route on June 10th. So we'll see how far this Flyers Rights Advocacy Group for airline passengers gets with its pleading to the FAA to restrict operations of the airline or the airliner within the ETOPS 120 rule. And speaking of that, I don't have it in front of me, but I was reading an article. The NTSB, remember we talked about this on the last episode, they are still not convinced that this problem has been solved. Remember we talked about the solution, the fix, is to put these batteries that could exhibit a thermal runaway to just, enclose it into this box to contain the fire and the overheat and the fumes and smoke. But we still don't know why these things went into thermal runaway. But the NTSB, among others, me, would like to know why. Why are these things catching on fire? And so the NTSB has been frantically doing research and investigation to find out what the source of the thermal runaways are, and they're spending a lot of money on CT scans trying to figure out what's going on. And we should hear the results of their investigation shortly. The problem here, though, is, and most of you may know this already, the National Transportation Safety Board is a U.S. governmental agency, and the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, is another governmental agency. The FAA is the one that implements, basically has the authority to determine how things are going to happen, how things are going to operate. The NTSB has no authority to say, we're going to ground the 787, or we're going to do this, we're going to do that. They can make suggestions and give advice, but they have no power to do anything else. And you know what? In the past, many, many instances, when the NTSB has been very concerned about something and has said, this is what we recommend, the FAA has said, we don't agree. We're going to do it this way. We're going to let it happen. So all this research that the NTSB is doing to find the cause of the battery problem, it may not have any bearing on what really happens with the operation of that airplane. So, again, we'll keep our ears and eyes open, find out what they find out. All right, let's go back and play this sound bite.
Captain, incoming message.
All right. Time for feedback. Let's see how we're doing on the time. Right at about an hour. A little bit less than that. Excuse me. Let's see. Go back here to my feedback folder. And let's start off with Luke. in the United Kingdom. He says, Luke again here from the UK. Quick question about your early years at Acme. How did you balance your work life, being away for long periods, with being a family man and raising your children? Do you feel that starting out as a pilot and being at the bottom of any seniority list is a detriment to a family life? Keep up the good work as always, and would like to transfer. And let's see. He wished that I would transfer to the 767. Perhaps I'd hear you in the 400s out of Heathrow one day. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, who knows? My long-term plan at Acme is to eventually fly an airplane like that flies mostly domestically, but also flies to Europe, maybe Asia. Perhaps one Europe trip, UK trip once a month or so, and then the rest of the month flying domestically. That's my ideal job right there. So we'll see. But right now, my seniority in that category is pitiful, and so I'm not going to dip my foot into that. For me, would be a cesspool, because I'd be flying trips to places I don't want to go, and flying when I don't want to fly. So, needless to say, I'll be on the MD 8890 for some time. Okay, so your question, balancing your work and your family life. That's one of those tough things about this job, and that's one of the reasons why I think that we need to be appropriately compensated for doing this kind of work, because we're not home every night. Now, I guess it's possible. If you're senior enough, you could be home every night. You could just do nothing but flying turnarounds or one-day trips. But if you're not senior enough to fly those kind of trips, you're going to end up flying, usually you're going to fly those longer trips, and you're not going to have any choice. You're going to be flying over the weekends. And as many of you know, being home on the weekend is when you want to be home as the head of the household or one of the parents, because your family is busy on the weekend, right? During the week, you have the routine, you have kids in school, etc. The weekend is the place, or the home is the place to be in the weekend. Fly during the week, be home on the weekend. Well, when you're junior, you're low on the seniority scale, guess what? Yeah, you're going to be flying over the weekend. You're going to be missing a lot of events in your kids' lives. Now, if you're lucky, you're not going to miss too many things. Now, I have to say, if you're creative, even if you don't have a lot of seniority, and really I've not had for 18, 19 years of my experience in my career at Acme, I've been junior. It hasn't been until the last 5 years that I've really experienced any kind of seniority. And trust me, I love seniority. It's really nice. But I've been able to be creative and work things so that I'm there when I need to be there. Those important days, those birthdays, those holidays. You know what? I've only been gone from my family one time in my more than 24 years of flying for the commercial airlines, away from Christmas from my family. And that was when I was a very, very junior co-pilot in the 727. And I just had no control over my schedule. But in many of the years, I worked really, really hard during the beginning part of the month so that I timed out before Christmas time, and I was home for the rest of the month. There were other situations that resulted in me being home for Christmas, and there were a couple times when I was actually leaving on Christmas Day, but for me, that was okay. Okay, even though my birthday is the day after Christmas, who cares? You can celebrate a birthday anytime, right? So that was never an important thing for me. Christmas Eve was always very important, and Christmas morning when the kids were young, Santa Claus and all the opening of gifts, that was important to me. So if I could be there for Christmas Eve and at least the early morning hours of Christmas Day, and then I had to leave on a trip sometime during Christmas Day, sometime in the afternoon, yeah, I'd miss Christmas dinner with family. But at least I was there for the most important part of it. Really, it depends on the dynamic between your spouse and you. Actually, in some cases, being away from your spouse and your family actually results in almost a stronger bond, stronger relationships. Again, it depends on the situation. If your spouse is not independent, mine is, but if she or he is not, that could result in problems. So that's a factor. And again, as I said, there are ways that you can work it so that you're home more than not. But I'd be lying if I said that not being home as much as I would have been if I had a regular job didn't affect my relationship with my family, or doesn't affect the relationship of some pilots with their families. And it's just one of those things that is part and parcel of this work. And again, I think that many of us are making the sacrifice, and I think that we should be duly compensated for it. So that's one of the many reasons that I think airline pilots deserve a good compensation. All right, thanks for your question, Luke. Oh, well, let's see. No, okay, I think I answered your question. And I think Luke has some more feedback later in the show. So let's move on. Brett writes in, Jeff, hope you get a chance to answer this on your podcast, but why do you think that Delta Airlines bought Pinnacle Airlines? What do you see in the future for Pinnacle? Any ideas when airlines will begin hiring? No, I have no idea when airlines are going to begin hiring. This is from Brett, by the way. Thank you, Brett, for your question. Well, you know, I work for Acme Airlines, not Delta Airlines, so I don't really have any insider information. But I and many of those who follow the airlines and their relationships with regional airlines know that Delta, a few years back, owned either mostly or fully a couple of regional airlines. Atlantic Southeast Airlines, one of them, Comair, another in Cincinnati, and they ended up selling them. And then you're thinking, well, why would they buy Pinnacle Airlines? And I can only suppose or surmise that they could see, because Pinnacle was going through some tough times and they were in bankruptcy, that perhaps it was getting to the point where Pinnacle was about to liquidate and disappear. And regional airlines are very, very important for the major airlines as far as getting the feed to their hub and spoke route systems. And perhaps Delta Airlines thought, we can't afford for Pinnacle Airlines to go out of business because it would be a detriment to our efficiency and economy. So they probably said, you know what? We hate to do it, but we're going to go ahead and buy Pinnacle and keep them from going into bankruptcy and liquidating, or keep them from being liquidated in bankruptcy. So that's my idea. I don't know. I'm not an analyst. I'm not an expert in this area, so it's just a guess. But again, being that I'm from Acme Airlines and not Delta, I don't know. I have any insider information on that. But good question. Perhaps somebody listening out there might have some idea why it made good economic sense for Delta to purchase Pinnacle. Okay, I mentioned that Luke would be sending more feedback, and here he is again. He said, Luke again, interesting air traffic control for you. And then he has a link. Is the pilot really within his authority? Oh, you know what? Excuse me. I think we've already covered this. So that's my bad. Sorry about that. That was something that I should have removed from my show notes. But we will hear from Luke again. Trust me. So let me do this. This from Pasadena by Brian. Captain Jeff, are these issues happening more often, or am I just hearing about them in the news these days? And he has a link to an incident at Newark Liberty International Airport, where a Scandinavian Airlines SAS plane's left wing clipped the tail of a United Express plane, a regional jet, on a taxiway, and no one was injured. And I guess both airplanes had to cancel their flights. And let's see, the accident damaged the SAS plane's left winglet, which is designed to minimize drag in flight and conserve fuel. The United Express flight was towed back to the gate, and the SAS plane taxied back to the gate under its own power. He says, have you ever had an accident with one of your aircraft or any close calls? If you don't want to talk about anything from personal experience, maybe you can relay some stories from other pilots. Thank you, Pasadena Brian. I've not had any incidents where I've dinged a wingtip. And you're right, it does seem that lately we're hearing more about these incidents. I don't know if it's just because they're being reported more often with technology and social media and the fact that everybody has a smartphone and can text and Twitter and all that kind of stuff, or if it's some other reason for increased incursions or incidents on the ground hitting other airplanes. I think it's the latter, actually. I think it is occurring more than it used to. And I think it's for a couple of different reasons. Again, this is my opinion, not based on any scientific research. But one of the things, you'll notice that the SAS plane had winglets, that part of the wing at the tip that goes upward. And some of these winglets are huge. I mean, the 767s out there with these winglets, those winglets must be, I'm guessing here, 10 to 15 feet tall. They extend way beyond the height of the fuselage. I think that we as pilots are used to, driving these airplanes around on the ground with the wingtips, but not with this. I don't think we have it in our head yet that these things are like out there really far and then they're sticking up really high. So I think that's part of it. Perhaps in the past we had some incidents or close calls or almost incidents, but because we didn't have that winglet sticking out there was no collision. Perhaps that's the issue. I don't know. So I think the winglets is part of it. The winglets are part of the problem. The other thing that I think is happening is that with airlines like Acme trying to increase the efficiency of the operation, let me take you back. It used to be at Acme where we would receive all of our takeoff data, our weight and balance information, all the stuff that we need to put into the computers and set our airspeed bugs and get all squared away, was given to us before we pushed back from the gate. That was all handled before the aircraft ever moved. Now, because, again, to increase on-time performance and efficiency, we are doing a lot of that stuff while we are taxiing the airplane. Okay, so we're setting settings, and we're reading checklists, and we're doing a lot of things that kind of take a little bit of our attention away from where we're going with the airplane. Okay, and I think that might be part of it as well, where we're being distracted, a bit, and that might be one of the reasons why we're seeing more incidents of hitting other airplanes on the ground. Again, my opinion only. Okay, this from Benton. He's a new listener. He said, just started listening to your excellent podcast. Thank you, Benton. I work at Denver International Airport for airport operations. I perform airfield inspections, etc., and also work as a ramp tower controller. If you ever make a turn here, I'll buy you coffee and show you our ramp tower in action. Wow, I sent Benton a reply and said, I'll definitely take you up on that. Now, it's been a long time since I've been out to Denver, but who knows when I'll be there again. And if so, if I have enough time, I'll definitely look you up, sir. And oh, by the way, reported on an earlier podcast, an episode back, I think it must have been in 2012, where a FedEx airplane was landing and they had a tail strike. And wondering if you were there at the airport at the time, or if perhaps you were even the person that went out and did the runway inspection after that. If so, let us know if you know any information about that. That was kind of interesting. Never really heard. That's the thing about freight airlines. They really don't get into the news that much because they don't carry passengers. I mean, freight airliners can crash, and you hardly hear a peep about it. This tail strike was not reported in any of the major media outlets, and it's kind of just disappeared. So, wondering what the final outcome was of that incident. All right. Well, so much for that. This is from John. This might be something to comment on. I think this is John in Minneapolis. This might be something to comment on. Frequently listen to Catholic Weekend and sometimes add comments in the chat. No, I don't know. This is from John Klingel. This is in regard to a crash of a KC-135 Stratotanker air refueling aircraft in over the skies of Afghanistan. And sadly, John, and everybody was killed in that, by the way. I don't know what happened there, and I'm not sure if they know if what caused that explosion. But they think it exploded in flight and killed all crew members aboard, which is kind of sad. So I apologize for not being able to tell you anything more about that. Perhaps somebody out there listening might know something more about that accident of the tanker over the Afghanistani skies. Hi, Captain Jeff. I see there has been a lot of discussion among the listeners of your show about fear of flying, so I decided to add my voice as well. I used to have a tremendous fear of flying, mainly turbulence. But when my job required me to make frequent transatlantic trips, I decided it was time to combat this fear once and for all. I came across the Virgin Atlantic website, HTTP, double, somebody's going to say. You don't have to say all that stuff. Okay, so here we go. The Virgin Atlantic website, flyingwithoutfear.co.uk, and decided to give it a go. But before I signed up, I visited their blog and found all my answers there. By just reading their blog, I was able to overcome this lifelong fear. And the blog is virginfwf.blogspot.com. I guess that's a Virgin Fear, Flying Without Fear. That's what that stands for. virginfwf.blogspot.com. He says, now I fly with a smile on my face and am as calm as can be, even during some of the most terrifying turbulence I've seen. Hope this helps some of your listeners. Kind regards, Peter. Thank you, Peter, for chiming in. And I'll have the links to the Virgin Atlantic website and also their blog, and perhaps some others out there who may have some kind of anxiety at all about flying may benefit as well. And I'd also like to add that it is my belief that a majority of the people on every single flight have some level of anxiety, be it a teeny tiny bit of anxiety about flying to, oh my gosh, I'm about to explode, I'm about to go into a panic attack, I'm so afraid to be in this airplane. And of course, I think most people are somewhere in between the two, where they are uncomfortable about being on that airplane, but they have to. Their job, their family situation requires that they take a flight. And I think that you'll agree with me that the more you know about what we do, and in fact, I suspect that several people listening to my podcast probably are listening to gain knowledge about what happens, on my side of the cockpit door, to learn about what causes turbulence, other things happening, that gives them more knowledge about what is happening in the skies when they're on an airliner. And I think that really helps. Knowledge definitely is power. And I'm all for doing whatever I can to allay people's fears and anxiety. And one of the things I like to do is that when I'm talking on the PA, I sound like this. I try to sound calm, cool, collected, to make people feel that, hey, you know what? The person that's in control of this airplane sounds confident, sounds relaxed, sounds like they know what they're doing. And that gives them a certain degree of comfort. Some people have to have a drink to make them feel a little bit more at ease. Some people have to take medication to kind of help block out that anxiety. But anyway, again, I'll put the website URL and the blog URL in the show notes, and perhaps others can benefit from that information. And thank you again, Peter, for chiming in on that. Okay, Steve writes in from Maryland. Steve King, not the author. This is probably a question for one of your Airbus pilot friends, but with the side stick setup in the Airbus family, do pilots, after years of controlling the aircraft with their right hand, find it difficult to adjust to the left seat with left side controls? Is there extra training involved to prepare? Thanks, as always, for the great podcast and taking time for questions. And you know what? This is interesting. Steve was not the only person that had a question like that for this episode. Excuse me. Pasadena Brian also wrote in. He says, it's my understanding the captain sits on in the left seat and the first officer on the right. When it's not your turn or segment to fly as captain, do you switch seats with the first officer, or as captain, do you always sit in the left seat? If you always sit on the left side, are there any issues for the first officer piloting the airplane from the right? As in, are all the instruments in view, even the ones to the left of your yoke, or are they duplicated on his right? Also, how difficult is it making the adjustment from right side to the left? For example, with taxiing, the center line isn't where it should be from the other's perspective. I've noticed these issues when driving on the wrong side of the road in places like Japan, England, and Australia. I always turn on the windshield wipers when I need to use the turn indicator and find myself drifting in lanes or find it hard to park in a parking stall. Maybe that's just my bad driving. Just wondering if pilots have similar issues when moving from one seat to the other. As always, thanks for putting out your podcast. Pasadena Brian. Okay, so both of you, let's see, let's go back. It was Steve with the Airbus side controller and Brian with the sitting in the various seats. And let's see. First of all, everything, all the primary flight instruments, airspeed indicator, well, on a modern airplane, you have a flat panel display, an EFIS, a CRT on the older airplanes that is displaying a lot of this information all in one place. Or you might be on an older airplane like the one that I fly, where you have the standard setup, where you have the attitude indicator on top, you have the navigation display right below it, and then on either side of the primary flight display, on the left you have the airspeed, and on the right you have the altimeter. And this is the classic instrument T. And your cross-check is such that your primary emphasis when you're doing your cross-check is to concentrate on the primary flight. That's why they call it the primary flight display, the attitude indicator. Okay, it's all about control and performance. So you look at that, You set your attitude. That's also where the flight directors are, the flight director bars. Excuse me. So you're looking at that mostly. And then you glance to the left at your airspeed, then back to your attitude indicator. You glance to the right at your altitude, back to the attitude indicator. You look down at the nav display, back to the attitude indicator. That is a classic instrument cross-check. Now, I've never flown an airplane yet that has all that stuff all in one flat panel display. I will soon. I think that Acme is retrofitting all of our MDs with these fancy systems where you're going to have like a large screen with your primary flight display, your attitude, your altitude, your airspeed, all that information right there. And then you have another large screen that shows your navigation information, radar information, TCAS information, etc. But regardless, whether you're in a modern technology airplane with that kind of display or the classic display, it's duplicated exactly on the other side. Okay, so the first officer sitting in the right seat has the same displays and instruments that I have in the left seat. Now, there are some things, for instance, brake pressure gauge, flap indicator. That's just a couple things that I can think of right offhand that are maybe on my side or the other side and not both. But those aren't critical instruments. Engine instruments, they're located in the center. So both pilots have a clear view of all the engine instrumentation. So when you are flying from the right seat for a long time, as I was, let's see, I was a flight engineer for a year and a half, and then I was a co-pilot for another 10 and a half years before I upgraded to the left seat. And I thought it was going to be a tough thing to do, transitioning from holding the yoke, or in the Airbus case, the side stick controller, with your right hand and your left hand on the throttles as a first officer on the right side of the airplane. From transitioning from that to now you're holding the control column with your left hand and you're putting your right hand on the throttles. You know what? It's not a big deal at all. You acclimate to it almost immediately. It is really a piece of cake, and it's amazing how quickly you just adapt to that. Not like driving a car on the left side of the road. For us Yanks, we're used to driving on the right side. I'm sure that transitioning to the other side of the road is more difficult. I've not tried it myself, but I can imagine that would be more difficult. So, it's not a big deal at all. Again, we have all the same displays that we're used to seeing. We're just using the different hands. And no, we don't. Well, when you upgrade a captain, you go into the simulator. So you're flying the simulator for several hours. So by the time you actually get into the airplane, you're used to it. So not a big deal at all. And I'd like to. I just thought of something. I thought it's kind of a interesting anecdote. The 727, when you're flying as the captain on that, your responsibility for every single landing is to deploy the spoilers. They don't have, at least at Acme, our 727s did not have an auto spoiler system. So, for instance, most of the airplanes that we fly these days, including the one that I'm in right now, when the main gear touches down and the ground proximity sensor says, "Oh yeah, you're on the ground," if you have the auto spoiler system armed, the spoilers will immediately deploy. Well, in the 727, that was the responsibility of the captain. So you got into the habit, whether you were flying or the co-pilot was flying, to grab the spoiler handle, which was in the center quadrant to the left of the throttles. You'd grab the handle and you'd pull it back toward you to deploy the spoilers, the ground spoilers. Well, as I said, the airplane that I fly now, when I transition to it, has an auto spoiler system. So you pull it up to arm it, and then when you touch down, that thing comes back rapidly. And when we're in the simulator instructors always just get a real big kick out of guys that were flying the 727 because they know what's going to happen. What's going to happen is that we're going to touch down and we're automatically going to take our right hand off the throttles and reach for that spoiler handle. And guess what happens? Whap! It just wraps your knuckles and it hurts like the dickens. I mean, it really, really hurts. And they laugh, and you are holding your hand, swearing, and you usually do it, and it took 2 times for me. I think I was talking to an instructor, and they said, on average, it takes 2 times for you to learn that you never reach over to deploy the spoiler handle again manually. That just getting wrapped on your knuckles 2 times is enough. You know, it's like teaching Pavlov's dogs, I guess, or whatever animal in the lab. It doesn't take long. That negative reinforcement is very strong. So, just thought I'd share that with you. Yep, me. My knuckles were wrapped twice, and let me tell you, it really does not feel good. And especially when somebody's behind you laughing, then it really makes it even worse. So, yeah, no big deal from going from right seat to left seat, as far as I'm concerned. Maybe if you're a professional airline pilot out there and you think that there is more to it than I'm making out, then let me know. Okay. And the first part of your question, Brian, we always sit in the same seat. So for every flight that I'm on, I am the captain. Whether I'm flying the flight or I'm the pilot monitoring, I am always the captain, which means that I'm always in charge, and if anything goes wrong, it's always my fault. And so I always sit in the left seat, and the first officer always sits in the right seat. Now, in the military, there was a position on the C-141 Starlifter that we called first pilot, I think, and it was a program that we had to get the guys that were flying the right seat before they transitioned to left seat or aircraft commander. They didn't call it captain. They had a program where you would sit in the left seat with the appropriate instructor on the right side. I think it had to be your instructor. Maybe it didn't have to be. But just so that you could kind of get used to the different perspectives sitting on the left side of the aircraft. And most importantly, most airplanes have the steering tiller, the nose gear or the nose wheel steering wheel or tiller or whatever system is employed in that particular airplane is on the captain's side, the left side only. And that's true for the MD-88, MD-90, the 727. I think it's true for all the 767 models and the 757. I think the 777, could be wrong about this, but I think that there's a steering tiller on both sides. I'm not sure about the Airbus airplanes, if they have the ability to do nose wheel steering from either side. But you get the idea. It's taxiing the airplane on most airplanes requires that you sit in the left seat for normal taxiing. In an emergency, you can taxi an airplane around from the right seat without nose wheel steering by using differential braking, etc., and very limited directional control with the nose wheel, but using the rudder pedal steering. But in most instances, that's the person sitting in the left seat's job. So I sit in the left seat all the time, again, whether I'm flying or I'm the pilot monitoring. So, again, thanks for your feedback and questioning. Both, Pasadena Brian and Steve. Hey, Captain Jeff. This is pilot Ben Evans from Central Ohio again. I have a few questions for you and would like to hear your comments if possible. As an active pilot and X-plane simulator pilot, a developer has released a very good and well-programmed Boeing 727 aircraft on the X-plane platform. I remember hearing in past shows that you enjoyed flying this classic aircraft. One plug-in add-on to this 727 sim program model is a very functional inertial navigation system, INS, that was commonly named CIVA, C-I-V-A. Can you talk a bit about the use of this or other INS equipment that was used before the GPS system of present day? The inertial navigation system and the equipment used has both pros and cons, as with any system. Do you have any funny or hair-raising stories that you might want to pass on to pilots that flew after this system was retired? In flight planning, did your pre-flight checklist include programming the lats and longs in the CIVA before the plane got its pushback? Is there any INS equipment being used in other parts of the world? The Delco Carousel IV-A INS was used on many Boeing aircraft, namely 707s, 727s, early 737s, classic 747s, and also on the L-1011 as well as the DC-10. Does the military actively still use this equipment on the 135 and the KC-10? I don't know. Always keep up the great show and always enjoy hearing the next podcast. Thanks, Jeff. And this, again, is from Ben Evans in Central Ohio. Okay, the 727, when I was flying it at Acme, at one point, I think when we ended up getting another company's airplanes, no, well, for some reason, they had some extra Omega units, which use very long-range radio signals or something that to navigate with. Not very accurate. And we had some of our airplanes retrofitted with that system. And but we never had the INS, the inertial navigation system, in the 727, at least in Acme. What is going on?